the second Sunday in Black History Month, or if you prefer, the sixth Sunday after the Epiphany. This is February 12th, 2023. And here is the reading from the scripture, Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." Yes, yes, yes. Let me begin by stating a simple fact. I have not preached in some time. About 3 weeks ago, as you all know, I fell ill, and Presiding Elder Atkins kindly stepped in to fill the breach. Just last week, Mary Baldwin University celebrated its annual Kwanzaa Rite of Passage for our new students, our First Fruits Festival, which is always filled with the flair of song, skits, and dancing. Because the theme this year took its cue from Spike Lee's School Days, a movie recounting his historically black college experience at Morehouse University in Atlanta, our students recalled its music and leaned with all their might, stamina, and skill into the strut and swagger of all the dance numbers. Oh, did they dance. My colleague, the Reverend Aretha Cross, came all the way from Newport News to witness one of her church's children perform her parts during Kwanzaa. And since I was loath to let her go so soon, I asked Reverend Cross to stay and preach for our church the following day as we inaugurated Black History Month to the accompaniment, I might add, of a splendid trombone choir under the direction of a generous and sincere Robert Graham. She gladly agreed, and so she managed to bless each of us who heard her. But the Sunday before that, Reverend Atkins had relieved me once more from my usual duty of a Sunday morn. I had traveled with Mary Baldwin's debate team to Virginia Wesleyan University in Virginia Beach so that they might engage in competition with teams from the other 15-member colleges of the Virginia Foundation for Independent Colleges. It should not surprise anyone that it has thrilled me over the course of nearly 10 years to serve as the coach for the students who sign on for the rigors of mock debating, who sacrifice smaller pleasures for the sharpening and honing of their abilities to construct arguments that are more than valid, but arguments that are sound. Each year, they must work together closely and quickly to devise a strategy for untangling some ethical conundrum, some thorny moral dilemma. They must resolve the seemingly irresolvable in a quick-witted and sterling demonstration of sharp reasoning and acute discernment. This year's theme was ethics in social media. In one scenario, for example, the judges required students to provide a recommendation to a healthcare worker, we'll call her Helen, who had responded to a friend's post on Facebook about a loved one's health crisis. Helen knew that the technology necessary for treating the affliction at issue was not available at the medical center where she was employed, but she knew of a hospital across town that had a history of success in using the new technology. In her Facebook chat, Helen recommended that her friend advise her loved one to seek treatment at the hospital across town. rather than her own. But when the healthcare workers' employers, that is to say Helen's employers, discovered the posting on Facebook, they instructed their employee to remove it because it provided an advantage to their competitor, the hospital across town. Helen understood that if she failed to comply with her employer's wishes, that she might be terminated. Indeed, she could count on it. But she had a family of her own to support, so her job was essential to the well-being of her own children. The prompt for each team was, what should Helen do? In a flash, I knew how I would respond to the prompt, but I had no idea how my students would argue that case. They are young. They always have been young. They have no spouses, no children, no homes of their own on which they are paying off a mortgage at a 30-year term. Their school loans have yet to come due because they have yet to graduate. They own no stocks, no bonds, and scarcely know how to write a check for more than $100. I wondered how they might hear the not-so-subtle threat to the healthcare workers' financial security, a threat intended to make her retrace her steps to offer help and care to a friend she considered dear. I wondered, too, how they might weigh the good for Helen's family against the good for her friend's family. Would they choose to sacrifice the one for the other? In either direction. Which brings us to Jesus. Jesus has a way with the law of God, that law that Moses handed down as he had received it from God when Moses sat in God's holy company upon that daunting, beclouded mountaintop where lightning flashed and thunder rolled. Jesus stands upon a mount too, but not nearly as high as the one Moses ascended. But Jesus recalls that law for a grass-seated congregation eager to hear the young rabbi from Nazareth make it plain what God's law demands. Jesus identifies several moral trespasses, from murder to anger to debt avoidance to adultery to swearing. He does not say which offends most grievously, and so when I read it, I make no determination as to which may doom me more. But I hear Jesus emphasize each of them unsparingly, as though the spirit of these laws is more imperative than the letter of them. Jesus urges us to forge our character in accord with these laws, not as rules to consider when it may prove convenient, but as the scaffolding for building a life so that all may flourish. Jesus tightens the grip of God's ordinances upon the human will, so that to choose God's law above one we give ourselves makes us choose the good of our neighbor over the good we choose for ourselves. This is hard to do. But this is why murder strikes us as repellent, why we think of con men who deceive to rob as disgraceful, these self-seekers. It is why someone who is always angry, especially with those who are closest, appears to us to lack self-control. Someone who is always aggrieved turns everyone away. He or she lives in the enclosed and suffocating bubble of his own solitude and wonders why he has no friends. Adultery, too, has similar consequences. Infidelity reveals a character unmoored, uprooted, and detached from the nourishing soil of deep relations. The person afflicted with this disease of spirit and failure of conscience cares too little about anyone, including the person with whom he enjoys his fling, not to mention his spouse. But marriage is not the only place where we may prove ourselves shallow in our commitments. Wherever we stake ourselves to do something, to go somewhere, or to be the person upon whom others may rely, and we fail at it over and over again because our casual dalliances so easily distract us, then we have committed, I say, adultery. Our commitments are shallow and as thin as the paper upon which we may have signed our name. I don't think it should surprise us that Jesus then admonishes us not to swear either by heaven or the earth. Here is that man, the one who swears, that man or woman who already has proven himself unreliable, who now adds to his accumulation of faults this deep swearing, as though to convince by how daringly he swears that what he failed to do, he shall surely do in the end. He's not going to do it. Jesus warns us all not to drag the faultless Almighty who created the earth and the heavens into that hot mess, which is our doing alone. Jesus goes so far as to restrain us from even swearing by our own heads and limbs. For though we wish to think these be our property to dispose of as we please, the truth is that we did not give them to ourselves. Even your body is the workmanship of another before it is yours. Which is why Jesus proves the point through the sacrifice of his own body to overcome the evils of this world. Now, if you're having a bit of trouble following that train of thought, go back, listen to it again. And then ask yourself this question: why would Jesus go that far? How can he trade his life for ours? How does that work? I should think, first of all, by way of answer, I would want to say this. To prove how inestimable is the value of every body and every soul that gives it life. We fail to understand this still as often as we say it. We say it all the time, but without comprehension and without understanding. Jesus gave his life so that we might live. Oh, how easy it is for us to say that. But this is a profound truth and not some flimsy religious platitude, which too often is the way it sounds when we say it. It is the sovereign will of God that the high value of life should be demonstrated in our willingness to lay down life, to lay it down, to spare the lives of others. And the only way any of us has even the slimmest hope of ever making so enormous a sacrifice is if we are moved by love of the other. That's the only way that could be possible. Jesus' take on the law, his Sermon on the Mount, is this radical way of shaping character so that character may give itself away through acts of love. The law means nothing without love, because without love, not even one of us would be capable of keeping God's law at all. To love God's law is to love God's creation. And I mean this in the most radical way of all. Every thistle, every beetle, every swan, every sparrow, every blade of grass, every porpoise, and every person. It is to see the dignity in each living thing, to see the divine care and craft God expended to make it. So back to my students. As we have prepared each year, my students and I, for every year's debate, I caution them always to be guided in the decisions they would make, to take care to recognize the dignity of the persons involved in each problem. I told them to err on the side of what was best for the person or persons most likely to suffer the most. I told them, choose for the least of these, choose for the person most easy to overlook. Choose for the weak, the oppressed, and the dying, and hope for the best. Say yes to them and then stand by the yes until the very end. Say no to the oppressor. Say no again when he brings cannon, torch, and spear. But let your no be no just the same. So how did my students decide the fate of Helen, the healthcare worker, in the story with which I began? They urged her on to make it plain where healing could be obtained, to shout out loud on her friend's Facebook page, and not just there, go to YouTube too. They shouted out that she should shout it out, how the desperately sick could receive the saving treatment they so desperately craved. They spoke of her training, Helen's training, that suited her well for a job in healthcare anywhere in all of God's good earth. And even if she should lose the job she had, her prospects were not so poor that her children should suffer any pangs of hunger ere she found the next. But the loved one of her friend was ill unto death, save for the news that Helen had. So they argued, and so proud was I to boast that I was their teacher and not some hack who had never read scripture, who had never imbibed the holy text. At the conclusion of the match, I shouted to Courtney, who was our captain, to Lewis, who is on his way to law school, and to Jeremiah, who is still trying to find out who he is with that prophet's name, yes, yes, yes. Amen.